waves of nostalgia.
A lot of waves.
A movie dropped this weekend that I'm going to go out on a limb and say, excluding the Pixar movies that were meant for theaters, but then because of the pandemic and everything, got moved to Disney Plus. This, it's the best Disney Plus original movie. Very low bar, very, very, very low bar, but I think it leaps and jumps and just with ease and grace skips on right over that bar, and that is Chippendale Rescue Rangers, directed by Akiva Schaffer. You got Chip, voiced by John Mulaney, Dale, voiced by, oh, wow, blanking on his name. He stars in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He was in SNL. I was hoping by
You got
getting
Andy
him.
Samberg.
Andy Samberg, that's who I was thinking of. You got Tim Robinson plays a character that I don't want to say right now because I want to ease into the spoiler aspect. Eric Bana voicing Monterey Jack, and just a slew of famous people, just cameo after cameo after cameo. A lot of famous cartoon characters from all histories, not just Disney. I would say honestly, the Disney characters basically make up the main cast, and then all the characters in the background are pretty much non-Disney animated characters, or at least non-Disney animated styles that you recognize and are recognized, like a character style that was from Big Mouth on Netflix. Minor spoiler alert, but Stan Marsh from South Park was in the background of a shot. Found a basically to kind of explain. I feel like it is in the world of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where tunes exist alongside people, and that the animated movies and shows that we and video games that we watch are really performed by these animated actors. And the best way I describe it is it's 21 Jump Street meets Who Framed Roger Rabbit, with Chip and Dale as these kind of actors who have to become detectives, have to become the characters that they played on TV, solving this mystery of what happened to their friend Monterey Jack. And I thought it was really well done. I think this is definitely 100% a family movie. Little kids can enjoy it, and there's a lot of themes, and adults basically allegories for drugs and human trafficking that Disney and this movie pulls off really well, that kids don't fully know what they're going for, but parents can watch it and easily know what they're actually talking about. And yeah, I actually quite enjoyed this. And what are your thoughts, Tristan? I've talked quite a bit about it.
Yeah, if you follow this channel for a little while, you know that me and Joe did a live watch of Space Jam: A New Legacy back when it dropped in the height of uh, health related drops, where things weren't coming out in the theater, so they were just dropping on HBO, and that felt like it was a fever nightmare where it was just Warner Brothers taking all the things I own and being like, here, take them, and throwing them at the screen. And I was like, you get to that final scene in Space Jam where there's just a bunch of people in like Party City costumes CG together in the background of this one scene, and you think they tricked me into watching this movie. I don't know what I'm doing here, why I'm watching this. And this movie is like the complete opposite of that. It does take all of the IPs, and just sprays them all over the screen. Even beyond Disney, it takes some Netflix characters, it takes some Paramount characters, a really particularly prominent Paramount character is like a reoccurring supporting character here in this movie. You got some Warner Brothers characters, of course, some classic like DC related jokes. Even Nickelodeon gets a couple of shout outs, and I wonder if Nickelodeon said no to a certain scene that they ended up just not showing and explaining through dialogue. But we'll get to that more in the spoiler section, I think. But I had a blast with this, honestly, and it's not going to be like a
famous
4.5 or something.
I mean, I think a certain, we'll talk about that in the spoiler section, but I think a certain cola brand, a fish that was at one point associated with cocaine, said no to this as well, because one of the main henchmen in this movie is very clearly supposed to be a Coca-Cola bear.
Yeah, and there's literally a line where they say, you owe me a non-specific cola drink. Something like that.
But I think other than those two things, I know what you're talking about. They go all in. They're like, the characters are the characters. There's no like, oh, that's supposed to be this character. No, like it very clearly is this character from like all these other brands, Warner Brothers, Paramount. And I have theories on maybe how they got so many brands, but I want to hear more of your thoughts on the movie.
Yeah, I think what hurt something like Space Jam 2 was that it felt like just this big, long, half-ass at like advertisement for Warner Brothers. Like, oh, come see what we got on our streaming platform. And this feels like it has some heart to it. You know, the people behind Lonely Island are the writers and the directors here, and I've kind of mocked Disney over the last few years of like taking these random, even in this episode, taking like these random, like inexperienced people and saying, "Oh, lead our huge franchise," you know, and then it ends up inevitably being like a huge mess because they don't have the experience that you would need to write something that big. And you give that to people who are actually experienced comedy writers, and this is what you get, like an actual good comedy with a lot of creative jokes. And it's not just shoving stuff you know in your face, it's using stuff you know as like a punchline to some other joke within the movie. And it feels like your foreknowledge of these characters only goes on to like expand some of the punchlines of the jokes, because I've never seen a Rescue Rangers episode, so I know nothing about like this version of Chip and Dale. My only history of Chip and Dale is them being the mechanics in Kingdom Hearts fixing my spaceship, you know, so I know them from that, and that's it. And I was still able to get a lot out of this movie.
Yeah, I grew up like watching Goof Troop, Tailspin, uh, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, but like it's been so long, I couldn't tell you a single plot of any of the episodes of any of those shows. And if you think, oh, I didn't watch Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, like I'm not going to get anything out of it. Basically, they use the idea of Chip and Dale as basically these molds for them to put characters on top of, because they aren't playing like the Chip and Dale from the show. It's essentially like about the actors who played those characters, and I think it's such like tropes and stuff that you know that you don't need to know those characters. If you can fully enjoy this movie, if you haven't watched that show, and it'll probably just more add to it. If you grew up on that show and remember that show better than I did, it'll just make it better. But I think they tell you everything you need to know if you didn't watch the show, because I don't think they fully expect like, oh, we're gonna make this well-made, relatively high-budget movie just to do all this animation on the hopes and dreams that enough people remember this random ass show from the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun meta jokes with it, where like Dale is you know, he was a star of Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, and then the show gets canceled. So now years later, he's working as kind of like this washed-up celebrity. He goes around to like conventions and signs pictures, you know, and that's what some of my favorite scenes of this movie are him like hanging out in the artist alley at Hollywood Convention Center, just like talking to the characters who are next to him. And that's kind of the fun of like this real world too, where it's like not just all happy roses and sunshine. It's like, oh, he kind of is like this washed up loser now who just goes around to the different conventions and gets people to sign pictures for him. Like, I think that is kind of fun too. You mentioned like there's drug addict storylines, and there's an element to like the darker side of Hollywood here that they're able to capture, that I think added a lot to this and made it feel like not just a big walking advertisement for things.
Yeah, so I just want to say one final thing before we kind of move into the spoiler territory, because I do want people to watch this movie. I do think this is a perfect family movie that I feel like Hollywood doesn't really make anymore, unless it's like, I mean, I understand this is kind of a big franchise IP. I mean, it's not, but it's still like connected to Disney, but it's not like this big $200 million movie, which is, I guess, what I'm trying to say. Is that if you were a fan, if you like grew up or a big fan of like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, this is 100% a spiritual sequel to this. I mean, it basically takes place in the same universe. So yeah, that's the one thing, you know, if you want more of that type of movie, definitely check this out on Disney Plus. Tristan, any final thoughts before we move on to the spoiler?
Yeah, I definitely recommend this movie as well. I think the Roger Rabbit comparison is worthy, and the way that this is sort of like a, not just because it's obviously drawing from the same premise, but it also is like the way Roger Rabbit had, you know, like the spy mystery storyline, and also kind of like the cartoon stuff was going on in the background. This has like the mystery storyline at the forefront, and the cartoon stuff is just kind of like enhancing to the world. So I think you don't have to worry at all about like familiarity with Disney brands. I think it has a core story that you can just connect to basically. And I also think if you're gonna watch this, don't watch the trailers if you haven't seen them yet, because I think the trailers do give away a good amount of the fun cameos that come in the movie. That would have been a lot more fun to watch if I hadn't seen the trailer beforehand. So I highly recommend watching the movie. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, and for me, that's a pretty positive score for one of these ones. uh, so check it out. I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I even don't know what my rating would be. I'd probably be about a 3.5 out of 5, 7 out of 10. It's pretty much where I'd be. I think with that, we're going to move more on to the spoiler section because a lot of the discussion on this movie is going to be talking about the cameos and all that, and I don't want to ruin it for people that are interested in this movie. So, if you haven't seen this movie, come back, check out the rest of this review, and if you have seen it, hey, let's talk spoilers. And with that, we're going to be talking spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Ugly Sonic. The fact that they included that, A. B, made it work. And I want your thoughts on Ugly Sonic, because that was definitely, as far as like the cameos and especially the non-Disney IP, I mean, I think that's going to be everyone's number one takeaway with this movie is like the standout character.
Yeah, I mentioned that there's a pretty prominent Paramount character, and that is Ugly Sonic. So if you haven't seen this movie, they bring Sonic in here, but it is not the Sonic you know from the movie. It's a Sonic you know from the trailer to the movie that got trashed by fans online, and
it looked horrible.
Paramount, of course, was caught off guard by this, I think, and had to all of a sudden react very quickly and change the animation to the last second. And released the movie with a totally different Sonic look, and it's kind of like an infamous story of the internet outcry actually impacting the product, by the time it came out. Yeah. And they bring Tim Robinson in from Netflix fame to voice Ugly Sonic, obviously comedian fame, but currently big on his Netflix show, so there's some crossover there too. And yeah, Ugly Sonic was so much fun, and the fact that he's not just a cameo either. Like, I thought it was hilarious when he shows up in that scene I mentioned where Dale is working his Sonic Pictures, but he also comes back towards the end and has like a full complete arc somehow and like saves the day. And I honestly wish I watched this in theaters, not just, I mean, obviously it wasn't out in theaters. It would have been a fun one to see in theaters though, because when Ugly Sonic shows up at the end in that helicopter, like, I can't imagine the crowd not cheering for that.
Yeah, that was Ugly Sonic. Just having a full-on arc was great. So many great cameos. Batman versus E.T. And I believe Batman was voiced by Kevin Conroy, if I'm not.
Yeah, he was in his Batman v Superman battle outfit, and he has that goofy line of E.T.'s like, E.T. forgive Batman. Batman just like, okay.
So I want to run an idea by you that I want your thoughts on, like how they got all of these characters. And for me, I think it's free market research. Obviously, like, Warner Brothers doesn't need to know where the public stands with Batman. They know. But with a lot of these characters that were like these smaller characters that that aren't like on the forefront, I think it's free market research. You slap all of these characters in the background and you just see what Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all these people react to. If there's like a character that's like this minor character on a show and it's like, oh, this is one of the ones people are talking about online a lot, like it's Paramount or Warner Brothers or whatever studio knows, like, hey, maybe we could be doing more with this character. I think that's probably what it was. There's no way they paid for like each individual character. I think maybe they gave them a little bit of money, the studio, a little bit of money of like, hey, if there's characters you don't want us to use, and I'm sure maybe for certain characters there was parameters like you can't use them for this or that. But I think for the most part, my theory is it's just free market research for them. But I wanted your thoughts on maybe how they got all of these characters, and it seemed like free range to essentially use whoever they used. Like, with the whole plot of bootlegging characters, they got bootleg Homer and Bart Simpson, which, I mean, I guess those are Disney characters now, so they didn't need to get permission for those. But
yeah, it's interesting when you watch with that meta context of like whose characters are whose and which characters they're willing to go the furthest with, and you can tell, I think, that when it's not their character, they're a little tiny bit more respectful to it. Yeah. Like the fact that Ugly Sonic actually gets an arc, I think, is something that happened probably because it wasn't their character, and they either wanted to or had to give him a bit more than just the butt of a joke type of thing. But I would love to see like some interviews going into like how they got all of this stuff, because I imagine some of it was just, okay, we're gonna pay Netflix so that we can put this character from Big Mouth in the background of a random scene. There's kind of things like that. And I also think it's free marketing like, what does Warner Brothers have to lose by letting them have a couple of Looney Tunes show up in this? All it's gonna get is someone to be like, you know what, I haven't watched Looney Tunes in a while, and they go to HBO Max and start watching it, And I think in this era where everything is available to everybody at like any time at all, you could see more of this kind of stuff where studios are willing to market whatever random back catalog thing they can think of because someone can just go and watch it on HBO right now. And I thought it was a lot of fun. Like, I think the fact that they were able to reach beyond the borders of the studios and get other stuff outside of just Disney added a lot to the experience of this. Where we had no idea who was coming scene to scene. Was it going to be a Disney character? Was it going to be a Fox character? Was it going to be a Paramount character? A Warner Brothers character? You just didn't know.
Yeah, and I think like this is a movie that you almost want to watch twice. You watch it the first time for the plot, and the second time you're not even. I mean, not that the plot's bad or anything, but you're like ignoring the plot and just staring at the background the entire time to spot characters you missed, jokes you missed. Like Dobby was a model for Gucci in this universe. Like, and that's the thing that he was like blurry in the background that I caught him the first time, but you could.
Yeah, I didn't notice him the first time.
You could very easily miss him. Butthead is running for Senate. Just so many jokes in the background. If you're like Chun-Li is on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
There's a Squidward on the Walk of Fame too. Yeah. I noticed that one. Nickelodeon was a bit lighter on what they let them use, I think, and there's a lot of references, and like you see Jimmy Neutron's hair during like that scene of where there's a bunch of different pieces of things. You see a couple of things in the background, but I mentioned in the non-spoiler section that there's this arc where the main detective character tells her essentially origin story where she ordered a raid on the Nick Jr. studios, and it was botched, and I think it was the Rugrats or some characters of Nickelodeon fame had attacked the cops, and I think the writers maybe wanted to show that flashback, and Nickelodeon was like, yeah, maybe don't have the Rugrats kill a bunch of people, Yeah. Maybe that's a little bit.
And so many meta jokes. So I've had because I watched it last night, and I have it going on, and like every moment, every line seems so like crafted and so like focused on the universe. And right now they're doing the thing where Dale and Chip are beating each other on the head, and the bird like gets the alarm of like he has to come into work because they're doing the thing where they're flying around the head, and it's such like a joke that I feel like doesn't appear in your script until like draft 5 because you finally like think of that bit of like the bird, he's like getting called into work but he has to fly over somebody's head. And it's great. It's so like well crafted. Even if you're not into the story, I think you'd watch it just for the appreciation for the writing of it.
Yeah, I think the fact that the story is kind of basic at its core helps a lot because you're just like, okay, their friend's gone missing, a handful of other tunes have gone missing, let's like uncover the mystery. And that lets you just kind of bring the characters to different places and have interact with different characters and suspects. Like the old Peter Pan is now kind of like this washed up B-movie producer, and that's like a change to the character.
And so, and like especially if you know the history of like Peter Pan and the actor and everything, which if anyone doesn't know, Bobby Driscoll, who was a big time Disney kid, he was like kind of the original Mouseketeer, and kind of at one point he was basically Mickey Mouse was the face of animated Disney, and Bobby Driscoll was essentially the face of live action Disney. And he was the voice of Peter Pan in the classic Peter Pan movie, and he kind of got bad acne and aged, and Walt Disney was like, oh, you're not a cute little kid anymore. And he was kind of just left and abandoned, and he had a rough life, and he died early of an overdose. And it kind of, I definitely feel like the writers knew that and definitely incorporated that into their story of Peter Pan. The character, or the actor, I guess, definitely felt abandoned and left behind. And weirdly enough, the guy that played the kid that could never grow up was the only kind of tune that aged, which I thought was kind of a nice dichotomy. And just there was a lot of layers to it. And one of the other great bits that we haven't touched on was Seth Rogen voiced Bob, and one of the times that his character, which was kind of like a play on the Beowulf movie, or like they even said it out loud, Polar Express, because they said his character had Polar Express eyes. Um, his character gets knocked out, voiced by Seth Rogen, and then you see in the trailer, Pumbaa, the live action Pumbaa, appears over him, voiced by Simba, and then you see Mantis from Kung Fu Panda, also voiced by Seth Rogen, and then his character from Monsters vs. Aliens, B.O.B., voiced by Seth Rogen, appears, and I thought that was a great bit.
Yeah, that was a really good bit. That had me laughing for sure. And they all get like a line out, and then they all do the Seth Rogen laugh simultaneously. I thought that was really funny. The whole Uncanny Valley bit was very funny. You know, when they make jokes about like that specific era where they were still kind of figuring out human-like animation, and everything kind of looks real but not real, I think is how they kind of phrase it. And they make a reference to my all-time movie there, Cats. You know, you had a cameo from two of the cats from Cats. You got a Polar Express name drop, but I thought that was definitely funny. And I love that this movie feels like an overall tribute to just animation as a whole, and like animation is like a medium or a form of telling stories, you know. And whether it's the Uncanny Valley, whether it's like the old school black and white animation, whether it's, you know, the new, you call it a live action Pumbaa, but really it's just really, really detailed animation, you know. And I think that is an art form in itself. And this celebrates like all the highs and lows of animated storytelling in a way that I think feels really genuine and not necessarily like a commercial, because they're able to reach beyond the studios and just kind of celebrate the medium and bring in characters you love that from whether it's the main police chief is like a claymation, like a Gumby type of character that moves in like the stop motion kind of look, and he's like Play-Doh, so he's kind of sticky and stuff is kind of like getting into him, and he's getting deformed and misshapen. And other characters are 2D, and they talk about how there's like a 3D surgery you can get to turn yourself into like the new modern high-tech 3D look. And I think it's a really fun scene. There's like a crime scene sequence where you get the claymation guy, and then you get the 3D animated, and you get a 2D animated character, and then you get a live action human sticking their head in the window, and you realize like this, oh, of course, this whole scene is like miniature size because Chip and Dale or chipmunk sized. And I thought it was very fun to see like 5 different versions of animation all colliding in like a singular scene. Even if you don't know the characters in the scene, you can appreciate like the collision of all these different forms of animation coming together.
Yeah, and there were some jokes, like I could have talked about this in the regular, but Dennis Haysbert as the voice of Zipper was just great, because in the show he was like the super high-pitched fly. And the idea of like, you could have put, Monterey Jack and Gidget got married in real life, but just the thought of Zipper and Gidget were like the real love story behind the scenes I thought was just a really good idea and really great, and I loved it. Anything else you want to say about Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers?
One thing I'll say here is that I really am looking forward to a sequel. Shockingly, the first time I've watched a Disney Plus original and been like, I want more of this, instead of like, let this thing end, please.
Yeah, I was definitely like, I'd be 100% on board for a sequel, like if they like had to go on another mystery or something. But I'd also like be 100% down if they want to do a TV show that was in this world. It doesn't necessarily have to be Chip 'n Dale focused, but if it was like having them cameo and it could be set in this world, I'd be definitely down for.
Yeah, and I'd be down for the next movie to be much more in line with the Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. Like, you have the whole team kind of back together, and you have a character saying like, oh, I'm going to start my own detective agency. So you're pretty much set up at the end for like, okay, now the Rescue Rangers are going to like in real life start going on like these missions together. And I would love to see the next movie kind of be like, okay, the team is set. Now they just have a mission to go on. And you've gotten the world set up. You've gotten the kind of rules of it set up. So I would love to see a sequel. And I would wonder if the sequel would go further into getting cameos, or if the other studios would be like, okay, no, we gave you one, but you can't use it again. And it'll be curious to see what the next step of this franchise is, because this feels like a big success. It feels like people are really liking this. Even people who spend their days hating Disney all day are liking this. So I definitely expect this to be a hit for Disney Plus.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about if we do get a sequel is, other than Pete and Scrooge McDuck, we didn't really get any of the like quote unquote like main Disney. Like there was no Mickey, Donald, Goofy, Max, Daisy, any of those type of characters. So I'd be really intrigued if we were to get a sequel, if we would see those characters appear at all. Because
Yeah, I
Disney is
think that would
very
be a good
protective
move.
over those like family of characters.
I think that would be a good move for sure, because they are very protective and they haven't really done like a lot with those characters in the last few years. So it would be nice to see them again, and I think that's a perfect spot because you can kind of just bring them in and out. You don't necessarily have to do a lot with the character. You can just have them show up for a scene. Maybe like whatever mystery they solve takes them to some other part of the Toon World, and this is like the Disneyfied version where everything looks kind of like, a happy Disney World type of thing.
Yeah.
I'm really curious what happens next, and I am genuinely excited for a sequel to this. I hope it's a movie though. I'd rather have a movie than a TV show because I think that brings the budget a bit more.
Oh yeah, and I'm watching the thing. How did we not talk about Paul Rudd and Ant-Man?
He's very charismatic with ants.
Yeah, but that would be the plot I would do is Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. Mickey Mouse is like this big time. He's basically like the George Clooney of this world, like this big time Hollywood star, kind of almost classic, kind of semi-retired, and he goes missing, and who can find him but his old friends Chip and Dale.
This also makes me want to see a Kingdom Hearts show. It's time. Bring it to life.